This is E&P Reports from Editor and Publisher Magazine, the authoritative voice of news media since 1884, serving newspapers, broadcasts, digital, and all multimedia news publishing. And hello, Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P Magazine. Housekeeping as usual, listening to us on whatever podcast platform you enjoy. We urge you to follow us. Watching us on YouTube, there is a subscribe button below me. There's a bell to the right. If you hit that bell, well, don't hit it, but press the button to make it, chime or whatever. You'll get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of this vodcast series, E&P Reports. I am bringing in someone who's been penning a couple really, really fine features for us here at E&P. Jennifer Coe, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
You've been writing for us before your new gig, and now you've got a new gig. You're how should I? You are now the editor in chief of the Chicago Sun-Times, correct?
Executive editor.
Excuse me, executive editor of the Chicago Sun-Times. But before you got that gig, you were looking for work and writing to us about that experience, writing in a column in our diversity spotlight. So we want to talk about that, but we also want to talk about your first month on the job, which is why we're bringing in Gretchen Peck, our contributing editor here at E&P. Gretchen, you had put together an amazing cover story for us on shootings and how to cover them locally. And here we are with Gretchen, and Gretchen just went through Highland Park, right?
Yeah, exactly. As we were writing this story and kind of putting it to bed with production, Jennifer was kind of living this experience of dealing with, not only breaking news that the community essentially needed right away, but also embarking on what will be long-term coverage and kind of community healing as well.
So Jennifer, we have two separate topics to discuss with you. I hope we don't tax your brain too much in the next 30 minutes.
I think she can handle it.
Can you handle it, Jennifer?
Well, we'll see. I hope so.
All right. We'll get back with Jennifer Coe in Chicago right after this message.
This episode of E&P Reports is sponsored by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide are asking the same question. How do we accelerate the growth of consumer revenue? Traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way, costing you money. IQ Audience Plus by Town News is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers you to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Ready to supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income? Visit townnews.com/EP today to learn more about IQ Audience Plus by Town News.
All right, Jennifer, before we get started, I want to go through some of your background here because you don't look old enough to have this pedigree. I want to be honest with you. I mean, for those of you that are listening to this on your favorite podcast platform, Jennifer, you don't look like the many, many different gigs you had. You spent time at The Guardian, right? And then you were at the HuffPost, working mostly in innovation. Is that correct?
I was the managing editor for The Guardian in the U.S. and then for HuffPost, and then eventually started an innovation team and became the director for strategic innovation.
That's amazing. But then during all the shifts and changes and whatever, HuffPost, the sale and all that kind of stuff, you kind of got left on the, how should I put this? You were out of work, right?
Yeah, I was let go.
And how long were you not officially employed by a publishing company?
Okay, so more than a year, because it was like April, so of 2021, so May, June, so 14 months, something like that.
And during that time, you became a consultant. You hung up a shingles, we like to say. You started advising others, and then you went through the journey of trying to find a gig, and doing so, you actually penned an amazing piece for us at E&P, because what happened was, I think it was called The True Cost of a Job Search, and it was amazing because we had so much sharing, so much commenting, so much. It just resonated with a lot of people, because maybe you could help me sum it up, but basically what you were saying is that if you're looking for work and you've got money, or at least or maybe a spouse who's making money, you're going to do better than those that, just don't have the energy and effort and time. And this could affect how diverse our job forces are. Am I saying that correctly, Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's really about like who has the like privilege or opportunity to fully participate in these job hunting processes, in the hiring process. The processes are pretty intense, and I'm sure it depends on what level you're at and everything else, but the processes are pretty intense. And there's most people have to apply to multiple jobs, at the same time, and at the same time have to figure out how to bring in enough money to support themselves. And so what I was basically saying was that there was a lot of people who basically could not afford to fully participate in the hiring process, which probably leaves some people out, right? People who might be very qualified, but who simply don't have the kind of time that is required to fully participate.
And this could actually, I want to quote you from the article. You spent 500 hours on resumes, cover letters, applications, references, and it was mind-boggling as you're also trying to run your business on the side. And what did you say that was valued at over $100,000 if you were getting paid for that time?
Yeah, I need to actually remind myself exactly how much it was. I don't have that. I don't actually have the article up right now, but yeah, I mean, I think it was more than $100,000 when I looked at my consulting rate.
And then you interviewed some other people who you didn't give us their names who had similar challenges, and because it's mind-blowing because our industry is so looking for increasing the diversity in our newsrooms. And this could be something that what employers should be doing is streamlining the process more. Because you followed it up with a second piece, right? And talked about some of the hiring practices that may also be creating that barrier for more diverse candidates.
Yeah, that's right. Because, what I did was at first I was just sort of like looking for some, moral support, right? I was like, just kind of calling around to other colleagues that I thought were awesome and asking like, how is your search going? Like, maybe I'm just having, a difficult time, but maybe everyone else is fine. Right. And so I was calling around, and what I found was nobody was having a good time of it. People pretty much universally hated the process. And this is from, different candidates, a very diverse range of different types of candidates who I actually really thought were great. Like I'd worked with, and I thought were really great and would have loved to work with again, and they were all having trouble. And I thought it was really interesting hearing the different perspectives from people in different situations where in some cases the problem is time. They're taking care of kids, like they have other things they need to do. They can't jump on a job opportunity as soon as they see it, and then by the time they can actually make the time to see it, it's gone, that kind of stuff. Or conversely, people who just, the problem is money. Like they just, in order to kind of do all of the tasks that are required in some of these hiring processes, they would have to be paid in order to be able to do it, because otherwise,
they can't support their family. They can't pay their bills.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. The first article was kind of detailing the lives of these candidates that many employers are looking for right now. I mean, screaming, I need these candidates. And they were screaming that the process isn't working for us. And then the second one, you were giving solid advice then to the employers, which is this audience. As you know, it's mostly executives, 3,000 to 4,000 a month, mostly news publishers. And I think one of the things I don't want to read between the lines. You said, clean up your act. You know what I mean? Like, be more. One candidate actually said they felt the whole process was opaque. They weren't getting the true story of the job. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, that's right. Some people were saying, they felt that they didn't understand what the process would be up front. They didn't understand, like, if they actually had a chance at the role or not,
Right.
They didn't know, like, they would try to ask, like, well, here's some of the experience I have. Here's some of the experience I don't have. Would I actually still be, legitimately considered a candidate? And they couldn't get, obviously, an answer. And then so would have to go through this whole process. And then by the end, they didn't know if they were ever really considered, as a candidate. They would just like suddenly not hear anything. They would go through all of these interviews with people, maybe do tasks, and then get a form letter, or not even a form letter. Sometimes they would just see that somebody else had been hired for the role.
And no response, nothing. So down here, I don't want to quote The Sound of Music. Okay, I will quote The Sound of. I'm going to do whatever I want. It's my program. But when God closes a door, he opens a window, right? So suddenly you're not working, and then you got a ton of offers, like on the same day. Am I right?
Yeah, well, the same week. I got three. I got 3 job offers in 1 week,
and they were all high profile offers. You can't discuss the other 2. But spoiler alert, one of them was to be the executive editor of what I would call a marquee legacy brand news publishing outfit, very, very respected, the Chicago Sun-Times. And you got the gig. So I'm assuming now through this process and the writing for E&P, you're going to be influencing the hiring process there. But now I want to move on, because this is why I wanted to bring Gretchen in, because Gretchen spent a lot of time researching that cover story for us about how local journalism is impacted, or how we should be covering this weird world we're in. So you're in your first few weeks of the job, and then Highland Park happens. Why don't you tell us the story, then I'll let Jennifer pick it up. I mean, how did you hear about it? Who was embedded there? I mean, this is your own backyard, right, in Chicago. And tell us how this all unfolded, at least from your perspective.
Yeah. So I woke up, I was supposed to have the day off because it was July 4th. And I was like looking forward to doing all kinds of things involving my move, like, all this packing, all these things I needed to do, because I had just gotten back to LA after having spent a few weeks in Chicago to kind of get started and meet people in a newsroom. And I got woken up by a buzzing happening before 7:00 in the morning. It broke through my do not disturb, because I have that thing of multiple calls or whatever. And so I got a call from Dave Newbart, who is the interim managing editor. And he said, "Oh, have you seen a City Desk Slack," which is kind of where a lot of this stuff happens. In terms of deciding like what's happening, like when there's breaking news and things like that are happening now. And it's a channel that both reporters and editors are on. And so he said, "Take a look, please." There's been a mass shooting. And I looked at it, and we started talking about what to do, what the plan should be. And we also in the call started talking about like, what should we do about the imagery.
One of your editors was there at the parade, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So Lynn Sweet is the Washington, D.C. bureau chief. And so she's not editor, but she's the bureau chief at Washington, D.C. And she was actually in Highland Park at the parade, because she was there visiting her sister, and she was there to do, to record one of her At the Tables in Chicago. And so, she describes this in her really harrowing, and really, I think, powerful and personal narrative about what happened. She was there, she's heard bullets, and being a reporter, she ran toward the bullets and wanted to see, what was happening. And while she was doing it, she was capturing, so she was slacking us, kind of saying, "Hey, this happened. Does someone want to call me?" And one of our editors called her, and they started working out like what was happening and what she had. And then she started sending in pictures taken on her phone as well.
So I actually learned about Highland Park from Lynn's tweet that morning. She actually broke the news for me. And I remember just thinking, wow, what's the newsroom doing at this moment? Because that's sort of like that moment of, we have the responsibility of getting information out to the public as soon as possible, reliable information about public safety. But then you have all of these tentacles to the story, obviously, that are presenting itself in that moment. So what were those conversations like, Jennifer?
I mean, in the beginning, it was really just like everyone piling on to Slack, right? Mm-hmm. It was like, okay, Lynn explained what's happening and what she was doing. like I said, someone got on the phone with her and started kind of coordinating. And then we had people on the audience team kind of like piling in with, hey, here's what we're seeing from social media and everything. And some people like talking about if they spotted other stuff in the news, like everyone in the newsroom, if they spotted something that could be helpful to the story, they just put it in the Slack, you know. And then of course, photographers went out, you know, we had other reporters who started to, you know, work the story in different ways while Lynn stayed where she was all day, basically.
Did you have discussions at that point in time? I know it was probably really frenzied, but about safety and security of the newsroom and your journalists as they went out to report?
Well, I think we have some protocols, you know, kind of, we cover crime a lot, unfortunately. Yeah. And so we do have some protocols in place. Of course, Lynn was not outfitted with like a bulletproof vest and paired up with somebody else as would normally have been the case, because we didn't expect, I mean, we were not, she didn't go out to cover the story. She was there when it happened. So, you know, actually, you know, once the shooting had stopped, that was less of an issue. And it was more about how do we kind of cover the story as best as we can, while keeping track of where we think the shooter might be, trying to figure out, like, based on what people are saying, like kind of where the kind of hunt is versus kind of what's going on with the victims, and what we can do to kind of help explain, you know, what happened, and also the kind of fallout and impact overall.
So let's talk about graphic images, because that came up in our reporting on this, particularly related to school shootings. And, you know, how do you ethically cover this, particularly when there are children involved? And of course, there were children involved that day as well. So I know you've spoken about sort of this dilemma that you face. Can you walk us through that conversation as well? I know it wasn't as many conversations.
Yeah. It was honestly many conversations.
Yes.
So, you know, like I said, Dave Newbart, who, you know, was the first person I talked to about what was happening, you know, he said, take a look at these pictures. What do you think we should do? And we talked about it. And, you know, when I first saw the images, they were, you know, some of them were very gory. And the first thing that crossed my mind is, of course, like, we can't show these. But then I also felt like it really told the story, right, in a way that none of our words were going to tell the story. And I kept thinking about one in particular, the one that we did end up deciding to publish, because it felt to me had such documentary value. Okay. If this was a moment in history, you know, like the biggest mass shooting, you know, or one of the biggest mass killings, you know, in Illinois, that there may be value to documenting what actually happened that day, what it looked like, and everything. And the one picture, it just to me showed the kind of signs of chaos that normally, you know, we only see in like war zones and things like that, where it's like people threw beach towels on the heads of the victims that are dying and raced to try to help the victims that were not yet dead, you know, like that were not dead. And some people are still running. And so it's just making these kind of like quick decisions on like how to help people the most and stuff like that. To me, there was something so powerful about that, because you don't expect that in a July 4th parade. So many of us have been to July 4th parades. Yeah. And it just, to me, I kept thinking that there was big documentary value in showing the chaos of that moment, the tragedy of the moment, the fact that we couldn't even like really tend more to the people who had died, and everything, and the kind of what that looked like, that I thought people really needed to see if they wanted to know. And so, yeah, so by the end of the call, I was sort of leaning toward potentially showing one of the images, but Dave and I said we really need to talk to more people. We started talking to, you know, other people in the newsroom who had different opinions, and I'll have to tell you that there was plenty of dissent. Sure. In the newsroom, and people who thought it was not the right thing to do. And then I also reached out to Kelly McBride at Poynter, and I reached out to Tracy Brown at WBEZ. You know, so we talked to a lot of people. In the end, I probably reached out, I think, definitely to more than a dozen people, and we kind of kept having this discussion about what are the what is the journalistic value in
Mhm.
running it, and is the potential harm we could be causing as
Sure.
well, and then looking at how we could minimize that harm as much as possible. Yeah.
So you also communicated that to your readers as well. What kind of feedback did you get from readers?
I got less feedback than I expected from readers. I did get a mix. I mean, most of the social media responses were pretty positive. We're like talking about courage and applauded the decision. But then there were some people who said, you did this to sell newspapers, or this is the kind of classic, if it bleeds, it leads, sensationalism, And so I would say it was a mixed bag, though. Honestly, better than expected. So
yeah. How much did sort of the weight and the frequency of mass shootings in the country and just sort of the scourge of it influence your editorial decision making there?
Well, I think it was pretty influential, because when we were thinking about journalistic purpose and like what is the point of doing this, of course, one part of it, like I said, was that documentary nature of this seems like a historic moment, an important moment, and our job is to tell what happened. But part of it was the reason why it seemed like such a historic moment was because these things kept happening, and it was obviously a big part of the public discussion right now on how much are we willing, we have to, when we're trying to balance out all of the issues, all of the discussions about guns, all the discussions about violence and crime and everything. I think it's important for people to see the reality of what we're dealing with, and the reality of what's happening as a result of various different decisions that we're considering now.
Mm-hmm. We know that these stories of mass shootings, in particular school shootings too, can have far-reaching coverage. As I was working on that cover story here in Connecticut, we had coverage in the local papers about Sandy Hook all these years later, because there's the justice system, everything that's related to those stories, and the community stories and personal interests, how the families are recovering, and even stories about local newsrooms and how they're recovering from it. So moving forward now, this horrific incident has been laid at your feet. How are you approaching coverage moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of this is still a work in progress for sure. And we're going to have to still talk a lot about it and discuss what the community wants to, and bring the community into the discussion. So I don't think we have it down yet in any way, but what we did was we had a brainstorm inviting anyone who was interested from the newsroom to talk about what we think the goals are for our Highland Park coverage going forward. Because we wanted to talk about, well, there's going to be follow-ups, obviously, from this. And we wanted to make sure that we're doing it in a thoughtful way. We're continuing to kind of lead on it in Chicago, but also that we're not kind of overplaying the significance either compared to all of the other crime that happens in Chicago. And so we brainstormed the kind of goals and what we hope to achieve, with this coverage for the community. And one of the top thing that came out was that our newsroom really wanted to use this as sort of a jumping off point to kind of expand our crime coverage overall and expand how we think about this coverage. So kind of use opportunities from within the stuff we're doing to cover Highland Park, to serve the great interest we're seeing from readers in Highland Park, to also talk about, the broader, have a broader discussion basically about crime in Chicago.
I just interject here that just because not everyone who's listening to this or viewing this may know the history, that the Chicago Sun-Times now is owned by the broadcast entity WBEZ, right? Which still, it's 500,000 listeners in the area.
Yeah, we're affiliated with the Chicago Public Media for sure.
Sure, exactly. So that decision affected two brands simultaneously, in a sense that photo not only appeared on your site, but their site as well, correct? I mean, there's still separate brands in the market. and separate audiences. You and I had this conversation one. I mean, because public broadcasting tends to be, and I know it varies the market to market, tends to be more affluent, educated, and white. The Sun Times, when I consulted it for years, back in good old days, about 10 years ago, they said it's, uneducated men who bowl, it was that kind of a thing, beer drinkers. And that photo went into two separate brands, influencing millions and millions. And of course, it got picked up as well. Was it simultaneous on both entities? Did you work together on this? I'm just curious. Did they chime in?
Yeah, we worked together. Like I said, I reached out to Tracy right away, and we discussed it. We discussed what to do right away. And it was her idea to begin with to kind of like include it in Lynn Sweet's personal first-person narrative and everything. And we talked about how we were going to do the kind of as we kind of decided on the Sun Times side to kind of put it behind a click-to-view module, that kind of stuff. They also they made their own decision and decided that they would also publish it also behind a click-to-view module, but it was going to take a little bit longer for them to build it because we had just started a little earlier. And so they did end up running it, but just a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to hear moving forward. I'm sorry to interrupt, Mike.
No, go ahead,
but
please.
Jennifer, I hope we can keep in touch because I am fascinated by sort of the synergies of the public radio arm and the news organization now. So I hope you won't mind if I follow up with you on that in the future.
Of course, anytime.
Well, let's get into that for just because now that we've discussed the tragedy, it kind of reminds me when how is the play, Mrs. Link? I mean, this was your first month, and you were still trying to kick the tires, figure out where the restroom was, right? Get to know the team and all that and more. And you're
still haven't figured out the printer, yeah.
Right, and you're suddenly in national spotlight. But I want to discuss a little bit more about you, if I may, and your perspective of taking this job, because what Gretchen just said is very, very poignant. Think of the two brands that are meshing in Chicago. See, when you think of public broadcasting, you would think that they would want to pick up like a highbrow publication kind of thing, Pulitzer prizes, although the Chicago Sun-Times has won Pulitzers, I know, but it's a different audience. You are someone of color. You are now the executive editor. Challenge me on this. How do you see building your audience for the future and building a more diverse audience for the Chicago Sun-Times? Is that your vision? Has it been discussed? May I ask you your goals and dreams when it comes to that?
Yeah, absolutely. We certainly, I think I've been pretty clear that like my vision is to really bring the community in and to bring the community closer. So what I want to do is, of course, grow all audiences, but especially focusing on groups that have been historically marginalized. And I also really want to find new ways to make sure that we're actually serving our different audiences every day, and that we know this because we're actually communicating with those audiences. So I think, traditionally, a lot of the time there has been the kind of newsroom tries their best to do that, to serve the audiences. But when I look at the site, for instance, there's not a whole lot of places for people to feedback. So we don't have comments, for instance, and we don't have a lot of, we do have on Facebook, we ask a question every day and use a lot of that conversation. But I think there's just more that we can do to kind of be more inclusive, more open, and to make sure that, every day we actually know, who we're writing for and why, and, what we are trying to, how we're trying to serve those different audiences. So yes, I do want to diversify further, and I want to do a better job because we have quite a diverse audience. I want to do a better job of serving the diverse audiences that we are currently reaching. And I believe BEZ is the same. I think we're both thinking, how can we reach use the kind of partnerships that we have to reach different audiences than we currently have on our site and on our channels, because we don't have very much overlap in audience.
Right.
So how can we, help each other expand the audience for our work so that we can have greater impact? And also, how can we use the different pieces that we're doing, the different approaches that we have to better serve the current audiences that we have? Because, I don't really believe that, the audiences that we have on Sun-Times are not at all interested in some of the work that BEZ is doing. They may not be going there.
Right.
But I don't think that means that they absolutely would not be interested in some of these topics if they knew about it. So we've been, running a lot of the stories that they've done that we think our audiences really would want to know, and vice versa.
Fascinating, because I had a similar discussion with Juana Summers, who is the new afternoon anchor at All Things Considered. And I don't know if you're familiar with public radio's discussions about providing more diversity in their newsroom and changing the culture there. And she's part of that trend. In a way, if I may be so bold, you're doing it there in Chicago, where you're taking this brand and you're going to be, if I always like to use the term, polish it up, if I may say. I mean, bring it into the next decade and bring it into a whole new light. I got to ask, because it's just part of me. I'm kind of an aggressive publisher, always looking at competition. Do you feel that the fact that the Tribune did, how should I put this, is not actually owned by a company now that's putting a lot of cash into it? Do you think there's opportunity there as well? Or would you rather not comment on that?
Look, I really think that more journalism in a community is better. I really do. I'm glad that it's a 2-newspaper town, and I hope that continues, and that there's actually, in fact, I think there's definitely more than 2 newspapers in Chicago. Like, there's so much local news, so many cool publications in small different neighborhoods and everything like that, of all different sizes and appealing to all different audiences. I love Block Club Chicago, Chicago Reader, Southside Weekly. So I think we have a nice, robust journalism ecosystem there, and I'd certainly hope that the Tribune also continues to do the great work that it's doing. It just won a Pulitzer, which is great. And at the same time, yes, I think that if there are things that they are not going to be covering as much, there may be opportunities for us as well.
Well said. I'll leave the last question to you, Gretchen.
I have a fun question for you. I noticed on Twitter back in March, you were teaching a master class on travel writing. So in all of your spare time. So is that something you do regularly, Jennifer?
Well, I would definitely be open to doing it again. I did it once. I was asked, while I was consulting and before I had a full-time job and things like that. And I've always loved the idea of teaching, and thought it would be really cool to try. And I never have actually done it. I've had done some guest lectures and stuff, but I had not actually. I was like a writing coach when I was younger in Oakland, and to high school students and junior high school students. So it's something that I've always been interested in. And so when I was asked by Amanda Castleman, I did think it would be really fun to get a chance to do it with her. She's such an accomplished teacher. And I did get to learn a lot and really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed reviewing and getting to read the work of people who are trying to improve,
And you're also...
So will you be contributing travel pieces? From time to time?
I don't have any current.
Although I imagine travel will elude you for some time. You've got a pretty full plate.
But you're also the president of JAWS, right? Or do you still have that position now? Journalism and Women's Symposium?
I am still the president of a Journalism and Women's Symposium. We are having our, first in-person camp since the pandemic in September in Austin. So, I hope everyone will come, especially everyone who, is a woman or who supports women.
I love your acronym JAWS. That's great. Jennifer Coe, actually a contributing writer here at E&P, now the executive editor, if I may be so bold, of the Chicago Sun-Times. Well deserved. We're honored to have you, and we're going to continue this dialogue with you and maybe bring you in. That's a great idea, Gretchen. We should do an episode with the folks over at WBEZ, right? And kind of discuss the brand blending, if I may. What do you think, Gretchen? Good idea?
Great storytelling opportunities there. I'm really excited for you.
Jennifer, you take care, stay healthy, and try to find a little time to relax if you can.
Exactly.
Thank you. I will try my best.